So I've had some conversations with some people recently, and people have just felt discouraged from praying and not seeing results, or just feeling like God is just not going to answer a particular request or what they feel like is a need, right? And I feel like I definitely understood how they felt, because I know I felt similarly, and I have periods where I may begin to, start to feel some of those feelings as well. But I always have to get back to that place of understanding that the enemy would love for me to be discouraged, right? And for me to just be like, I'm done. What's the point of praying anymore about this? God clearly is not going to answer, or this is taking so long, or maybe he's just not going to do it for me, or whatever it is. You start to go through that, I guess, that rabbit hole of like thoughts, right? Which leads to you being discouraged, where your faith ends up being impacted, and now you're maybe not as motivated to pray or to be in your word or whatever it may be, right? It's like, it's a cycle. And so we have to catch ourselves when we start to notice the beginning or the trigger for that cycle, right? I say this because every now and then I'm reminded that as much as there are some things that I'm believing God for, and I'm trying to be patient and waiting to see that come to pass, I have to remember that whether God were to answer that prayer request or not, I would still worship him. I would still praise him. I wouldn't be going nowhere, right? I would still know and understand that he is still God. He is still good, whether he were to give me what I'm asking for or not. Like, he is still good, right? And I also have to understand that my life is in his hands, and he knows what's best for me. He knows what's good for me. And there are some things sometimes that we might want, but there are some prayers sometimes that may not necessarily get answered the way that you want it to be answered. And we have to get to this place of being okay with that. I'm reminded of, when Paul says that, that he had that thorn by his side, right? That he's asked the Lord to remove, but God said his grace was sufficient for Paul, right? And so I think we have to remember that we need to continue to be persistent in prayer and seeking God about the things that we are believing for, the things that we would like to see breakthrough in, right? But we also have to understand that whether he chooses to respond the way that we want it answered or not, he is still God and he is still good, right? And there are some situations, whether we want to accept it or not, where it may be one of those "my grace is sufficient for you" type of responses. And we have to be okay with that. And I know we don't want to be, because we want to believe that, like, no, this is God's will. Like, my will, like my desires and the things that I'm believing for and that I want breakthrough in and whatnot, like, that's God's will for me as well. But we can see Paul as an example that there are some things that God's like, my grace is sufficient. That's just going to have to stay there a little bit longer because it's serving a purpose, whether we agree with it or not, whether we want to hear that or not, right? And so I guess what I want you to reflect on and think on is, if God were to not to answer that prayer the way that you want him to answer it, right? Would you still worship him? Would you still praise him? Right? Would you still continue to have faith and know that he is good, know that he is God, and say, I'm not going nowhere? These are the things that I want you to think about, because if the answer is yes, obviously, of course, absolutely, then we got to pray from a place of knowing that, Lord, this is what I'm believing you for. But if for some reason this was not your will for me, you are still good. I'm still going to praise you. I'm still going to have joy, the joy that you are offering me. I'm still going to take on your peace and accept the peace that you are offering me, the joy that you are offering me, those things that you are offering me. I'm still going to receive it. I'm still going to accept it. And I'm still going to be joyful. So, just something to think about, that, would you still be there? Would you still praise him? Would you still worship him? Would you still minister his word, right? Or minister in however way, you're called? Would that change? Unfortunately, there are some people who would walk away or will walk away if a certain prayer is not answered or things don't pan out the way that they would want. And I think that goes to show that maybe your heart was never really for God. Maybe you never really loved him like you thought. It was conditional. And we can never have a conditional relationship with God. And if anything, we're putting ourselves in danger right? If we're walking that line of it being in a conditional relationship with God, because the enemy is just looking, he's just scheming, he's just waiting for the right opportunity for you to just give him that open door for him to enter and to just wreak havoc in your life. And so we can't be those who have a conditional relationship with God. Unless you do this, blah blah blah, or if you don't do this, no, that's not the kind of that's not true love, right? And that's not the kind of relationship that we need to have. We just need to know that we serve a God who is faithful, we serve a God who is good, we serve a God who has our best interest at heart. And if there's for some reason a prayer that he's not answering yet, or the answer is no, or my grace is sufficient, then we have to be, as hard as it can be, we have to accept that and just continue to move on and continue to move forward.